Welcome to the Keto Geek Podcast. Let's do this.
Health, nutrition, fitness, low-carb lifestyle.
Hello everyone, welcome back to our Keto Geek Podcast. We have someone really special here today, and her name is Amy Berger. By the way, Amy, just before you speak your first word, I want to say I really am tempted to add the word doctor before your name. I don't know why. Does that happen?
I think I've been called doctor once or twice. I am not a doctor, maybe sometime in the future, but right now I'm not.
Well, in my eyes, you're a kick-ass human being, and from what I've been reading through your book, it's amazing. It's really good, and I've been taking it slow. By the way, the book is Alzheimer's Antidote. I'm still on chapter 5 or 6, so please, I'm sorry about that. I should really speed up my reading. But it's very informative. It's been made very easy to understand for most people like myself who have never taken, I stopped taking biology after 8th or 9th grade. I still studied that kind of stuff, but anyway. So, Amy, would you like to, first of all, I usually delve into the narrative of the people that show up on the podcast. Do you want to talk about you for a few moments?
Sure. If anyone out there doesn't know who I am a low carb, keto, and paleo friendly nutritionist. I'm not really a zealot about any of it, but that's kind of the angle that I lean toward. That's generally what I specialize in helping clients with, is that particular way of eating. I came to it like a lot of other people do. I was overweight at one point, and for most of my childhood and young adult life, I was overweight. And I didn't have any major health issues, but I was carrying a lot of extra body fat despite doing a lot of exercise and despite, eating lots of wheat bread and fat-free pretzels, carbohydrate kind of things, margarine instead of butter, skim milk, all the things we're told to do. And I was heavy. And no matter how hard I worked and no matter what I did not lose weight. I was healthy, which was nice, but I wasn't at a healthier body weight. And I guess I just discovered low carb. At one point I just put the pieces together and said, this isn't making sense. I'm doing everything I'm supposed to do. Why am I not losing weight? Why am I not getting results? Something's wrong here. And after having spent many, many years blaming myself and beating myself up, mentally and emotionally for failing at this, it finally occurred to me, it's not me. I've been given the incorrect advice. And that's how I started in this. And over the years, that was over a decade ago. And over the years, my interest in this way of eating has, of course, morphed and expanded from a weight loss perspective into so much more. This type of diet is effective and therapeutic in so many ways for so many reasons, that it's almost like the weight loss is the least impressive thing that you can achieve with limiting your dietary carbohydrate. So that's where I'm at now. And I still don't know what I want to do when I grow up, as they say. I do see clients privately. I'm based in the Washington, D.C. area, but I consult with people all over the world via Skype or phone. And I do a lot of freelance writing in the health world. But, I don't know what I want to do over the next 20 to 30 to 50 years. I think I might want to try teaching, maybe at a community college or something, or, something along that line to reach more people in a way that I'm more comfortable with, just putting the information out there and then letting people run with it. So I don't know. That's me.
Well, you've gotten my attention for sure, and the people that are listening to this podcast as well. It's our podcast is just going crazy right now, and you're just by being here and talking, you're creating quite an impact here. So you're a very valuable person as an educator, as a great human being, and for being on this podcast as well. And I'm sure a lot of people are going to look up to you when they hear all about it. And please do read this book. I really can't recommend enough because of how it challenges so many of the conventional misconceptions about this. There's so many misconceptions about Alzheimer's as well. So I'm sure, or at least I hope you find your path in life, your enlightening, I suppose. So there's, so you have something called, okay, I'm going to butcher the name of this. How do you pronounce this? Tuit Nutrition?
Oh, yeah, Tuit Nutrition. That's just my blog, tuitnutrition.com, TUIT Nutrition.
And that's where you do most of your writings and all your blogging, correct?
Yeah, that's my own personal blog. I do a lot of writing for companies that are in this industry. But my blog, the stuff that I get to write about, the things that I love and the things I personally am interested in is that website. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. So what was the spark? How did this research about Alzheimer's begin for you?
It's interesting. I have no family history of Alzheimer's disease. I do have a family history of type 2 diabetes, obesity, stroke, and cancer. So, we don't need Alzheimer's. We have enough going on in the family. But I read the book Good Calories, Bad Calories by Gary Taubes several years ago, and your listeners may be familiar with that book. And he has a chapter that covered dementia, cancer, and aging. And it was the first place I'd ever read about a connection between glucose, insulin, and Alzheimer's disease. And it was really interesting to me, but not having any family history, it wasn't something that I felt like I needed to look into right away. But I said, I'm going to kind of remember that, and maybe I'll look into that someday down the road. And a couple of years after I read this book, I was in graduate school for nutrition, and I had to pick a thesis topic. And I was going to do a literature review. So instead of doing an original experiment, I was going to survey the scientific literature on a particular topic and write a synthesis, like a comprehensive review of the literature. And I chose to research this Alzheimer's issue. I said, I'm going to go back and look and see if there's enough information on that notion that I could write a thesis on it. And not only that I could write it, but that I would learn a lot in the process. And it's something that hasn't been written about by a million other people already. And when I started doing the research, I started looking into some of the medical journals on this issue. I was just absolutely blown away by what I was finding. And I felt like I had stumbled upon this hidden treasure that nobody knew existed, but it was kind of like right in front of our faces and just nobody knew it was there. And I wrote the book in order to sort of translate all of that scientific information into plain English so that people dealing with this condition and their loved ones and caregivers dealing with it can actually do something about it. Because I shouldn't have had to write this book. This book should have been written 10 years ago. A doctor should have written this. Some neurologist should have written this. I should not have had to write this. I wrote this book because it didn't already exist. And I just, after learning what I learned in the process of writing this thesis, I couldn't imagine keeping this information to myself. So that essentially is how it became a book.
Okay, so what was wrong here? Why didn't people get the epiphany? What do you think is going on with our system or government or whoever? I'm a little lost here.
I have no idea. I wish there was an answer for that. I am not a conspiracy theorist. I don't think anyone's deliberately covering this up. I just think up until now, there hasn't been any middleman, like I said, sort of translating what's going on in the laboratories and the research institutions and bringing that to the lay people, bringing that to the people with dementia, bringing it to their caregivers. There hasn't been anyone in between to connect those two. The things that I write about are not controversial. They're not unknown. You can readily find this everywhere in the medical journals. And it's just, I think, just nobody's been telling anyone about it. And it's happening more and more now. My book is not the first book on this subject. There's a physician named Mary Newport who's written 2 books, and I think they were just very small, and she maybe didn't have a lot of marketing muscle behind the book, so just not that many people know about them. And there's a Dr. Dale Bredesen who is coming out with a book in August called The End of Alzheimer's. And I write about his work in my book. I mean, I celebrate his work. He has a multifaceted protocol whereby they're basically reversing cognitive impairment, early Alzheimer's. And I think he may have reversed kind of like medium stage Alzheimer's, not late stage, not someone who's very severe and has been very sick for a long time. But I mean, up until now, this is by far the most promising thing we've ever seen in terms of making an impact on this illness. So I think the information is starting to get out there. I don't know why it wasn't getting out there a decade ago. I mean, and some of this is new. I mean, some of this research is brand new, so it couldn't have happened, 10 years ago. But a lot of the papers that I cite that are making these connections between glucose handling and insulin regulation and cognitive function, these papers are over 10 years old. Some of this is not new at all.
From what it seems, and after reading your book a little bit, it seems like the drugs that have been made to troubleshoot specific targets of this disease, while negating how it can undermine the entire circuitry of the system. Correct me if I'm using the wrong analogy here. It seems like that way.
No, I think that's exactly right. I mean, every drug developed for Alzheimer's so far has either been a total failure or it has had very, very little impact. If it has had an impact, it's been very slight. And you're right. I think it's because they are trying to go after individual symptoms rather than addressing the fundamental underlying major problem, which is kind of what I talk about in the book. And it's just like any diabetes drug or any drug for any other condition that is a multifactorial dietary and lifestyle problem. You can give a type 2 diabetic insulin, or you can give them metformin, you can give them some other drug, but that doesn't address what's causing them to need the drug in the first place. That doesn't actually, all it does is treat a symptom. It doesn't correct the underlying malfunction. And I don't know how much you want to get into the details, but just so people kind of understand what it is we're actually talking about, the major problem in Alzheimer's disease, and there are many problems, but the biggest, most impactful underlying cause of this illness is that neurons in affected regions of the brain have lost the ability to harness energy from glucose. And as a result, over time, they start to atrophy and wither and basically die. They basically starve to death is what's happening. And it happens over a long period of time. Nobody wakes up one day and all of a sudden they have Alzheimer's. This happens gradually. And because of the relationship between this disturbed glucose metabolism, Alzheimer's disease is regularly referred to in the literature now as type 3 diabetes or diabetes of the brain. Sometimes they also call it brain insulin resistance. And that, I just can't stress enough how uncontroversial that is. It is taken for granted in many published papers of Alzheimer's disease that that's the problem, a glucose metabolism problem. And I don't, that piece of information alone gives us a lot, it at least points us in the direction of certain solutions.
Yep, and I'm surprised why your book right now is not a freaking New York Times bestseller right now, because I think the information in there is just opening such a new outlook towards this disease, and it's just saddening to see how I would love for it to just go out there and go insane, go viral practically because of how much... Go ahead.
I appreciate you saying that. Thank you. It's just this week, somebody with a very large following must have shared something about my book because it jumped like crazy on Amazon. It was, at one point, it was number 600 something out of all books on Amazon, which I know to people listening, 600 doesn't sound like it's all that high on the charts. There are literally over 1 million books on Amazon. So to be in triple digits is amazing. And for the better part of one day, it was number 1 in dementia and number 1 in Alzheimer's and number 4 in low carb. And low carb is an enormous category of books. So I don't know who that was. People, I thought it was Dr. David Perlmutter, who wrote Grain Brain, who's very famous in the neurology world and the brain health world. I did a podcast with him, but that was like 2 weeks ago. So we don't know where this came from, but more people are starting to know about it, which is nice. And I think that Dr. Bredesen's book is going to be a blockbuster. And when his comes out, if Amazon pairs them together, then that will raise the visibility of mine too. But I think, mine is growing. Word is starting to spread a little bit.
That's fantastic. That's not just good for you, but for the people that are listening, reading the book. By the way, I would love to have an audio version of it out soon, please. That would be really nice. I think that was the first thing I told you. So one of the things that I wanted to discuss was that what are some of the steps that people can take to actually mitigate, reduce, or prevent this? What can people do here?
Okay, well,
by the way,
to the extent that this condition...
Yeah, I just want to add one thing. That feel free to go as technical as you want over here.
Oh, okay. It is the Keto Geeks, right? So we can geek out.
Yep.
So to the extent that this condition is the result of impaired glucose metabolism in the brain, there's a lot we can do. Pretty much all of the same interventions that you can do for type 2 diabetes should be effective for Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia too. But I mean, I am speaking specifically of Alzheimer's, but some research indicates that a lot of these same steps can be effective for other types of dementia. One of the more important things to understand about Alzheimer's disease is that many people with this illness, not all of them, but many, will have very high insulin levels. So even though we're using the phrase type 3 diabetes, these people very often have normal glucose levels. Their fasting blood sugar is normal, their hemoglobin A1C is normal, and their response to an oral glucose tolerance test might even be normal. So all of the glucose measurements are normal. But very often those things are only normal because very high insulin is keeping those things in check. And it's actually the sky-high insulin that is contributing to dementia. So anything we can do to improve insulin sensitivity. And you have to, if you want to know your insulin level, you have to specifically ask your doctor to measure it. It's not a standard part of routine blood work the way a fasting glucose is. I think it should be. And if it becomes a standard part of blood work, it's going to be an absolute game changer because they're going to identify literally millions of people, and that's not an exaggeration, millions of people who are, for all intents and purposes, diabetic. They just happen to have normal blood sugar. But they have the sky-high insulin. Some of them will have other markers of metabolic syndrome. They'll have high blood pressure, abdominal obesity. They might have skin tags, gynecomastia, like the growth of breast tissue in men, women with PCOS. All of this is from insulin. And you might not be a diagnosed type 2 diabetic, but that's only because the way type 2 diabetes is diagnosed in the U.S. is solely through glucose. Nobody's ever looking at insulin.
So what are some of the ways that you can actually detect insulin resistance in the brain? Is that a good question to ask here? Is there some way you can tell? It's a great question. I don't know if there's a way that you can tell. They can measure insulin, I think, in the cerebrospinal fluid. I don't think that's like something you could have done at your normal doctor's office. You know, that's something they do in these scientific studies where they take, Alzheimer's patients and maybe they do a spinal tap or something. But the interesting thing about Alzheimer's is that a lot of these patients have high insulin in the periphery, and the periphery means like your whole body that's not your central nervous system. They have high insulin in the periphery and a low insulin in the brain. There's actually not enough insulin in the brain, and they've done some studies where they give people intranasal insulin. They actually give them like a nasal spray with insulin, and I guess that goes directly into the central nervous system. And these people have improved cognition. They have improved memory while that insulin is in the central nervous system. But to me, and that seems like a really good short-term fix at least, but it is a short-term fix. That to me is the equivalent of giving a type 2 diabetic an insulin shot. Most type 2 diabetics have very high insulin. The last thing they need is more insulin. The answer is not to give them more insulin. The answer is to help the body become resensitized to the insulin that's already there. And I feel that same way with the brain and Alzheimer's. It's not that the brain needs more insulin. Why isn't the insulin that's already there not getting into the brain? And then
something that you can have measured is your brain's glucose uptake and metabolism. They can do this, well, maybe not the metabolism. They can measure the uptake, how much your brain is actually taking in glucose. And again, this is not something that you would have measured at the standard doctor's office, but they do it via a PET scan. They inject you with like a radio label type of glucose so they can measure how much of it is getting into your brain. The crazy thing about this is that a decrease in the brain's ability to get energy from glucose, like we said, is the main problem in Alzheimer's. This is measurable in people at risk for this condition as young as their 30s and 40s. That's when this starts. Like I said, nobody wakes up when they're 80 and overnight all of a sudden they have severe dementia. This builds over the course of years, if not decades. And I think it's missed early on because the brain is compensating. You know, people in their 30s and 40s, you're still young, you're still active, your brain is able to compensate. But as this progresses and goes further and further, your brain is no longer able to overcome this deficit. And that's when you start showing these signs and symptoms.
Yep, and I think I read one article recently, by the way, you're the expert here, so this could be absolutely wrong. They said there's hypoinsulinemia or something of that sort of the brain that happens, they can see certain symptoms in women that were like 24. There was a recent article that came out, I don't know if you read about that. So it's a bit scary what's going on.
You mean, are you talking, was it women with PCOS?
I don't remember exactly what it was. It's something I posted on my social media. It was quite alarming. I should have delved a little bit deeper into it, especially now that I'm talking to you about it. Now I feel like an ignorant fool.
No. The fact that you even read an article like that is great. I feel like I read something similar, and it was about women with PCOS, that they were measuring what we were just talking about, the cerebral uptake of glucose, and it was already compromised.
Okay.
So it's... I don't know. Sorry, I just lost my whole train of thought. It's amazing that they can measure this, and I just think, I mean, it's not something that everyone would have done. It's not like a normal test to have run. But the insulin, if we could see the high insulin in our teens, in our 20s, in our 30s, we could take action then and potentially prevent this from becoming a problem 30 years down the road.
Got it. And now we're going to delve into what I found interesting was the role of ketone bodies in the brain. Now, that was very fascinating for me, especially since most of the people that are listening to this podcast are going to be like, yippee, time for us to shine. So what's going on? What's the role of ketones when it comes to Alzheimer's in general? Seems like there's potential benefits to that.
There's huge potential benefits. So I think I said earlier that knowing that the primary issue in the Alzheimer's brain is this impairment of the ability to get energy from glucose, that points us toward potential solutions. And the most obvious potential solution is to raise ketone levels. And the reason that's a potential solution, at least in the short term, it's going to improve symptoms in the short term, is because even though the brain's ability to get energy from glucose is impaired, its ability to get energy from ketones is not impaired. They have shown this in animal models, and they have shown it in humans with Alzheimer's disease. Now, an older person with very severe dementia might not have quite the same ability to use ketones as somebody who's a little bit younger, but they still will use them. It will improve cognition in the short term. So I think any way we can elevate ketone levels, whether that's with a lot of coconut or MCT oil, or with exogenous ketones, or with a ketogenic diet, is going to help. But I think in order to actually potentially undo some of the damage that's already present and to potentially reverse this condition, I think you need not only a very low carb leaning toward ketogenic diet and other lifestyle interventions that improve insulin sensitivity and glucose regulation, such as exercise and fasting and better sleep and all that. I think because because of the biochemical mechanisms by which all of that works, and that it kind of resets insulin sensitivity, reprograms the way your body uses fuel, that stands a much better chance of actually, like I said, reversing this, or even if not reversing it, slowing it down. Whereas just elevating ketones through exogenous ketones, for example, is going to help that person in the short term, but it's not going to actually make an impact on the underlying issue. You're really just managing the symptoms. And in that sense, it's almost like the drugs, that all you're doing is attacking the symptom, which is great. Don't get me wrong. If we're talking about someone who's in their 80s and is severely demented, you are not going to get that person to give up their morning orange juice and bagel, and have eggs and coconut oil. It's just not going to happen. If you can get someone to change their diet like that, great, do it. But for the cases where that's not even really a possibility, then absolutely get these people's ketone levels up any way you can. But when we're talking about people with early onset dementia, early onset Alzheimer's, people in their 50s, people in their early 60s, they have potentially decades of life ahead of them, 20, 30, 40 years. And they're young enough that if they have a drastic intervention, I see no reason why they shouldn't be able to recover their cognitive function.
Yep. And once again, this is just so important, so crazy, amazing. And just to point that out, that this could potentially give a few moments, sometimes a few minutes, sometimes a few hours, sometimes a few days, sometimes all the way to a few years, for certain loved ones to spend quality time with their family or close people close to them. So this is just, I think, so important for the word to spread out. So one thing you said is that there seems to be a correlation between I don't know if you said that, but between higher ketone levels and improvement in cognition. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And it doesn't happen for everybody. There are some people who don't seem to show as much improvement. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. There are other issues contributing to this illness that could be a confounder there. But for the most part, yes, when you get these people's ketone levels up, their cognition is improved. And I think in at least one study, there was a correlation between the ketone levels and the degree of improvement, meaning the higher the ketone levels, the better the person's cognition.
Okay.
But I think it also could be an individual thing. There might be some people who require a certain level of ketones in order to have a noticeable improvement, and other people might have that same noticeable improvement at a much lower ketone level. Same thing with anyone using a ketogenic diet for any purpose. Some people don't really feel any different until they're at a certain ketone level, and other people, it doesn't even really matter what their ketone level is at all, as long as they're just generally low carb. So, it just kind of depends.
Okay. So let's go into a hypothetical situation in which, let's say, someone has Alzheimer's. What are some of the steps they can take right away, or what can they do? What kind of tools do they need to start applying to it themselves or their lifestyle?
If it's somebody who is aware enough and in control of their life and their diet enough, number one, very low carb diet, if not a strict ketogenic diet. Now, the doctor I mentioned earlier, Dale Bredesen, his protocol is not a ketogenic diet. He kind of favors a Mediterranean diet, which is higher fat and low glycemic, but it's definitely not ketogenic. So I don't even think everybody has to do a strict ketogenic diet, but you do definitely have to at least get rid of the vast majority of the sugar and the dense starches, the grains, the starchy vegetables. Do I think people need to eliminate raspberries and blueberries and eggplant? No, of course not. So I'm not demonizing all carbohydrate, but when your body or your brain has gotten to the point where it is no longer able to metabolize glucose efficiently, it does no good to keep putting more and more glucose into your body. Period, and there's nothing you can get from starchy carbohydrates and grains that you can't get from animal foods and from lower glycemic, low carbohydrate vegetables and fruits. I mean, in terms of vitamins and minerals. There's nothing you're going to miss out on by not eating, rice and pasta and bread and all that. So number 1, low carb diet. Number 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and all down the line is anything else that will improve insulin sensitivity and your body's glucose regulation. So exercise is definitely on there. Assuming somebody is able to exercise and it's safe for them. If you're talking somebody with severe dementia, it is not safe for them to exercise, and that's fine. I do think diet is the number 1 most important and most effective place to start. Everything else should be done to the extent that somebody's able to do it, and it's just going to be an extra bonus. It's just going to help. So exercise, a little bit of intermittent fasting, stress reduction, sleep. We sometimes forget the importance of good quality and quantity sleep in glucose regulation. It's just the perfect storm. Our modern lifestyles, we're very, very high carbohydrate diet. We're not sleeping enough. We're stressed out. Some people are not moving around enough. And it's funny, we take it for granted that diet and lifestyle play such huge roles in most of our modern illnesses, right? Whether it's type 2 diabetes or heart disease or, PCOS or people just, who are unhappy with their weight if they're obese. We take it for granted that certain aspects of diet and lifestyle contribute to these things. And yet, when it comes to Alzheimer's, we just throw our hands up like we have no clue. We have no clue what's going on. We don't know anything about this. There's nothing you can do about it. There's nothing you did to cause this. Why is that? How did we come to think that the blood-brain barrier was some type of impenetrable brick wall that protects the brain from all the damage the rest of the body experiences in light of our modern diets and lifestyles? And if anything, the brain is more susceptible to a lot of this damage because the brain doesn't have as much ability to repair itself as the rest of the body does. And I guess going along this way, something else people can do, aside from the diet and the exercise and the fasting and all this that I said, there are certain nutritional supplements that can be very helpful, taken at high doses, almost like a drug, to give you a therapeutic benefit. One of which might be omega-3s. Specifically, you want one with a high DHA amount because the brain is literally made out of these fatty acids. And so there are certain nutrient deficiencies that can contribute. I don't think they may be actively causing this illness, but they're making it worse. And specifically, I'm thinking of those omega-3 fats that the brain is built out of. Zinc, choline, which is, egg yolks are really the number 1 source of choline, vitamin B12. Many, many older people are B12 deficient or even low normal because the range is so wide. And one of the signs of B12 deficiency is memory loss and cognitive impairment. And if you have this B12 deficiency for long enough, those neurological symptoms are irreversible. You cannot correct them. And two other things that people could consider interventions to help prevent this or help potentially reverse it, if that's possible, is there are 2 medications that millions and millions of people are on, especially older people. And in my opinion, they are both directly contributing to the development of this illness. The first one is the easier one to talk about, so we'll start there. That's the prescription antacids, the PPIs, the proton pump inhibitors. When you take a drug that literally impairs your body's ability to digest and absorb nutrients, it is no wonder that you're going to have problems anywhere in your body, but especially in your brain. If you can't even absorb B12 and you can't absorb zinc and choline because your digestion is impaired from these drugs, it is no wonder that we have problems in the brain. And the second one, you could have a whole podcast on this alone, and that's the statin drugs.
Oh, yeah.
They lower cholesterol, and the brain, for people out there who aren't aware of this fact, the brain is built out of cholesterol. Your brain accounts for about 2% of your whole body weight, and it contains about 25% of the cholesterol in your entire body. The tiny little, the brain inside your skull has 1/4 of your body's entire cholesterol. And so when we take these drugs that deliberately impair the body's ability to make cholesterol, it's not a surprise to me at all that we have an epidemic of dementia and Alzheimer's disease at the same time that we have millions upon millions of people being prescribed these statin drugs. And these people have been on these drugs for 10, 20, 30 years. And so to me, dementia is the completely logical, totally predictable result of what happens when you starve the brain of cholesterol for decades. And I'm talking too much. I'm just going to say one thing. Like, they have done study after study after study where they have shown that higher cholesterol, including LDL, which is quote unquote the bad cholesterol, even though that's a total misnomer, higher cholesterol is protective of healthy cognitive function later in life, meaning the higher your cholesterol is as you age, the lower your risk for dementia.
Yep. By the way, feel free to talk your heart out. I'm not going to stop you. I'm going to enjoy this conversation. I love to geek out, nerd out. I'll go all the way down to the intricacies of everything. I might not be able to keep up with you on certain things, but definitely I can try my best.
This cholesterol thing is so... It's tragic. It is tragic because we have millions of people on these drugs. And if you go on the FDA's website and on the Mayo Clinic website, it's very clearly listed that memory problems and fuzzy thinking and brain fog and memory loss are well-known side effects of statin drugs. And they even say they're non-serious and they go away upon cessation of the drug, meaning when someone stops taking the drug. Well, that's great, but how often do you think doctors tell patients to stop taking their statin?
Yeah. So just could you elaborate just for certain listeners what the purpose of statins is as far as treatments? What are they used for specifically?
Sure. So statins, they lower cholesterol in the bloodstream. So if you have high cholesterol, it is believed, although this is, it's believed by some, let's say, it's believed by some medical professionals that by lowering the amount of cholesterol in your bloodstream, you will protect yourself against heart attack and cardiovascular disease and stroke and all that other stuff. Except there is the amount of cholesterol flowing in your bloodstream tells you nothing. Absolutely nothing about the amount of plaque building up in your arteries or the degree of narrowing of your blood vessels that would cause a heart attack or a stroke. So this cholesterol, we could not be more misguided about what high cholesterol means, what it's telling us. But that's what those drugs are used to lower cholesterol. And they have just a host of terrible, terrible side effects. And there's just kind of a big war now between the pharmaceutical industry that wants these drugs to stay alive because they just have billions and billions of dollars of profits versus a growing number of medical professionals that are questioning this whole cholesterol thing, that are saying, this isn't what we thought it was. We may have gotten this very, very wrong for a very long time. And again, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but it's pretty hard to deny or negate the terrible side effects of these drugs.
Yeah.
So I just think I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that long-term statin drug use is contributing to the epidemic that we see of dementia. I don't think that's an exaggeration at all.
Yeah. From where I see it, it seems like nobody wants to be the bad guy in this situation. They want to fix things, but they're just using probably the wrong tools here. And it also seems, as I posted a blog article where I mentioned that no one is really incentivized to be the middle person that you are as an educator about the connection between these diseases and issues. Like, for example, if you're a pharmaceutical industry, you're incentivized to create a drug that is a quick fix. That's your research. That's where the money goes, and that's how they get paid. And if you look at the food industry, they're incentivized to create a product that can get you hooked on. They have repeat customers. And if you look at all your supermarkets, they're the center, practically 60-70%, is just high carb food. And if you go to the US guidelines, you'll see that they incentivize the use of carbs as well. And even if they don't, then we're creating this game of Russian roulette where there's a high chance that you're going to be getting adversely affected by a high carb diet. And if they just give a call to CDC right next door, they'll get to know that, hey, nearly half the population is either pre-diabetic or is insulin resistant. And now that you're telling me that, hey, there's a chance that we might not be able to detect some of this stuff until we have concrete ways to detect insulin resistant in general. So it seems like the number of people that could be detrimentally affected is a lot higher than what the CDC has. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. And I think you're right. I mean, there's not a lot of incentive for anyone to really question this paradigm, except it's happening right now on its own. There are specific doctors and nutritionists that are kind of trying to sound the alarm and say, we got this so wrong. And even authors, right? Nina Teicholz, who wrote The Big Fat Surprise, and Gary Taubes, who's written The Case Against Sugar and Good Calories, Bad Calories. We shouldn't have to have journalists do this. Doctors should be doing this. Scientists should be doing this. And I think the tide is starting to turn because the patients themselves, the people, are starting to get fed up. They're starting to say, my doctor's got me on 8 different medications and I just keep getting worse. I keep getting more tired and more fatigued and fatter and more depressed, and my blood sugar is worse. If these drugs were good for me, shouldn't I be getting better? And as there are so many negative aspects to social media and the internet, and there are so many good aspects too, though. And I feel like in terms of the health industry, the best aspect of the internet is that people now have access to information they never would have had access to before. So when there is a 300-pound diabetic person who is following the standard advice for a low-fat, high-carbohydrate diet, and maybe they want to exercise, but they're so tired and they're so uncomfortable and their joints hurt that they can't exercise, and they wonder, why do they keep needing more insulin? Why does their blood sugar keep going higher? They're doing what they're supposed to do, or to the extent that they can, and they can now go online and search for their symptoms, or search for other people in a similar situation. Like, is there anyone who's been through what I'm going through, and did they heal themselves? What did they do? What works? I mean, like I said, as much as I hate social media, there are so many wonderful forums and Facebook groups and blogs now where people are sharing their stories. And this never could have happened 50 years ago. People would just listen to the doctor and go home and do exactly as they were told. But now we have the ability to question and to ask questions. And if your doctor can't give you a good answer, find a new doctor.
And speaking of doctors, how has this been interpreted by the medical community? Do you have some contacts? What's their opinion? What are they thinking about this?
With the Alzheimer specifically?
Yes. And your book and the message that you're trying to promote here. Is there a challenge for you?
I don't think there's a challenge for me yet, because I'm sort of relatively unknown. Nobody knows who I am. So
Come on.
Truly, I'm not worth attacking. I think when Dr. Bredeson's book comes out, he's going to face a great deal of criticism but he's an MD, he's a medical doctor. Mary Newport as well, who wrote the other books on specifically using ketones and coconut oil for Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and ALS and other neurological disorders. She also, I don't think, has faced a lot of criticism, but I think not enough people knew that her book was out. So there are MDs and PhDs doing this research who absolutely recognize the therapeutic benefits of either a ketogenic diet or, like Dr. Bredesen's program, a lower glycemic, higher fat, diet with other interventions that improve insulin sensitivity. And then there's always going to be another contingent of medical professionals that they don't buy it. They're looking for a wonder drug. They're going to keep looking for some magical answer, for some genetic mutation that's causing this disease. And going that route is just going to cost us another century of misguided research, of millions of dollars spent and thousands of hours of research in a direction that is not getting us anywhere. They have, like we said earlier, every drug developed to date for this condition has been a failure. It has not had a positive impact on this condition. And I think someone once asked me why I think there's such resistance to this. And I think it's difficult for medical professionals to even entertain the possibility that you could make a dent in something as severe as dementia with a dietary change or a dietary lifestyle change, right? There has to be a pill. There has to be a drug. There has to be something really complex. But why?
Yeah.
I think that's what it is. It's so hard for them to even imagine that you could change this with diet. And not only with diet, but with a diet that is so far removed from what we have been told is a healthy diet.
Yep. I think it has a lot to do with our culture in general, which is very consumer luxury oriented, where, let's say if I'm a doctor, I will be spending 80 hours on the grind per week, just dealing with patients, handing out drugs. There's so many issues. I wouldn't have the time to actually challenge some of the misconceptions or some of the information that has been fed to me throughout my medical schooling. So I think that might be one of the problems here, where all we want to do is, it just seems like we reward people for having this attitude of indifference towards some of these issues. If it's not me who has Alzheimer's, why would I need to care? If it's not my loved one, then, I'm okay with it. And yet at the same time, we're busy, occupied, just watching Netflix and all of these. We're a very consumer heavy culture. And it just saddens me that a lot of people don't want to go out there and do their homework. So I just, yep.
Well, I think you're right for the doctors that they don't have time to keep up with some of the latest developments, or if they do, they go to a conference or a seminar and it's sponsored by the pharmaceutical company. It's not going to be sponsored by the egg industry or by the beef industry saying that beef is loaded with zinc and B12 and, iron and all these nutrients that are really good for the brain. It's going to be sponsored by some drug company. And I think they don't have time to keep up with the latest. And hopefully some medical professionals will read my book, because it's very scientifically sound. There's no guesswork here. There's no assumptions. It's like, here is the biochemical mechanism that is at work, and it's plausible. It makes sense. Now, I am not trying to overpromise. Like, I want to make it clear. I use the word potential a lot, right? Because we don't know for sure that we can prevent Alzheimer's or that we can reverse it, especially in the very advanced stages. We know we can kind of reverse it in a more mild stage. So I'm not saying I have all the answers. I don't. But I think we have enough answers to at least start taking some kind of action. We know we're not helpless. We don't have to pretend like we have no information. We don't have all the answers, but we have enough to start moving now. Yeah.
So we've talked about the pharmaceutical companies. We've talked about doctors and educators. What about us as food companies? What do you think we should be doing here? Because I just feel like we just standing in the corner, letting people binge on awful food. I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be that company. So what do you think we should do? Should we? Yeah. What's your strategy for us?
For food companies?
Yeah, should we take the banner as well? Should we educate ourselves? Should we? That's the challenge that I'm facing. Is what can I do to help with this these metabolic sourced diseases that are chowing down our country? So, do you have anything for us?
Well, I guess I am not. I'm not that interested in the politics. There are people that want to lobby the government and get the official guidelines changed and all that. I'm much more about helping individual people make the right choices, because the right foods are out there. They're available and they're really not as expensive. People think, oh, well, I can't afford to eat healthfully. I can't afford to eat good food. If you can't afford all the best quality, pristine, grass-fed, organic, blah, 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 that's fine. Get whatever's on sale at your store, at your local grocery store. Don't feel ashamed. Don't feel guilty for just getting regular beef and regular chicken and regular cheese. Just buy whole, real, unprocessed foods. When you buy that, it's really not expensive. Pork, beef, chicken, seafood, it is not expensive at the regular store. The real bang, now if you can afford the better stuff, get it by all means. I work at a local farm. I am very sympathetic and very passionate about farming issues and small, local farms doing things the right way. But the truth is, the real bang for the buck with this way of eating comes from dramatically reducing the carbohydrate. The organic and grass-fed is just a bonus. The major change we need to make is to give these starving brain cells the ketone fuel they can use. And the way to do that is with a low-carb diet, regardless of necessarily the degree of quality. Now, the food companies, I see a lot of tweets and a lot of stuff on Facebook that's like very anti-big food and big agri and all that. Like, oh, we should bankrupt General Mills, we should bankrupt Kellogg's and Post and all them. And I actually don't agree, because the thing is, this is maybe getting a little too far astray, but a lot of us as individual people, at least in the U.S., have money invested in these companies, whether we know it or not. If you have an IRA or a 401k or some type of retirement plan, chances are a significant portion of that is invested in a lot of these companies, right? Because these are Fortune 500 companies, they're blue chip companies, they've been doing well for a number of years, if not centuries, some of these companies. So I don't want them to go bankrupt. I want them to make better food. I don't want General Mills doesn't have to go bankrupt, but they could stop selling Honey Nut Cheerios. Kellogg's doesn't have to go bankrupt, but they don't need to make Frosted Flakes. They could turn their economic engines, turn their factories and their production capacity toward foods that are better for us.
Okay.
And the consumers want that. I mean, General Mills just bought Epic, the company that makes a lot of the high protein bars. They make kind of like chicken and beef and lamb with the good fat, and it's all organic, pasture raised. General Mills just bought that company because they see the writing on the wall. They see the consumer trends. They know that the people are demanding this kind of food. And as people are moving away from the breakfast cereals and the breads and the grains and the toaster pastries, we're going to want more of this meat food, more of the good fat. And slowly but surely, those companies are going to start providing it.
Okay. So it seems like the most important role is in the society is an empowered consumer or an empowered individual, and they can be the ones who decide who gets to take the shots when it comes to economy and becoming a successful company, becoming a food business. For me, for Behind Keto Geek, what we want to do is to help educators like yourself send the message out, and even if sometimes that means that it goes against every product that we have on board. And I'm okay with that. I think the health of people is way more important than any monetary gains. In my eyes, I think of money as something that just keeps going and going back and forth. And I don't think I would be able to be happy knowing that my own country people are starving or dying away from these diseases, and I'm on a cruise ship just enjoying a martini or something. I don't think I can do that. So that's where I stand as well. So we're getting close to our 1 hour mark, and we're going to start wrapping things up. Do you have any vision that you want to share with people? What do you see yourself in the country, or what do you want to see here in the world? I
think compared to most people, I kind of have a small vision. I'm not looking to change the entire world overnight. I'm not looking to make some kind of huge splash. I want people to have this information and they can decide what to do with it. I don't think everybody needs to go low carb. I'm not a zealot. I'm not a proselytizer. This is not a religion to me. But I think people deserve to have the option. They deserve to have the information, and then they can decide for themselves whether they want to keep eating a certain way or maybe change what they do. My mother died at 65. She had very severe complications from poorly managed type 2 diabetes. She had so many things going on. Not once did a doctor ever suggest to her that she might want to change her diet. Not once. So I just think, I guess I enjoy making change at a smaller level. There are other people that, like I said, they want to influence the policy. They want to lobby Congress to change the laws and the guidelines. I get more satisfaction from helping individual people feel better and reach their goals, because I just think there's so much human potential lost to people just feeling awful. If you don't have enough energy, are you going to write your novel? Are you going to play your guitar? Are you going to be a good father? Are you going to be a good daughter? Like, if you just don't feel well, you're not going to show up in the world the best way you can. And maybe that sounds like a little woo-woo, but
no, go ahead.
People take things for granted, like, oh, well, I have headaches all the time, but that's normal. Like, oh, I don't have energy, but that's normal for me. Well, no, it's not normal. People just come to accept things because they're common, but because they're common doesn't mean they're normal.
Yeah, and that's the sad reality, and I think we're seeing a definite change in that, where everything seems fine and dandy on the social media, but that hides the narrative behind certain people, and it's obscured because it's expected of people to behave and feel and portray yourself in a certain way when someone could be dying inside. And I think eventually, or hopefully, we can build a better society, build a better experience for everyone in the world. So you bring a very important point, and I'm a little humbled by your message here. And I think sometimes you don't need to look at the bigger picture. Just go down, look at the small connections that we can build with each other, and be there for each other as well. So, yeah.
And I don't think I also try to be a voice of temperance and reason within the low carb and ketogenic movement, because as much as I love and respect and understand the benefits of eating this way, I don't think everybody needs to follow a strict ketogenic diet. I get many inquiries from clients who I actually encourage to eat more carbohydrate. I'm not talking 300 grams a day, and I'm not talking an endless bowl of pasta and breadsticks, but I have clients that are literally scared to eat things like red peppers or zucchini or Brussels sprouts because it's too high in carbohydrate. And when we get to that point, we've swung the pendulum a little too far in the other direction. So I try to kind of just remain a voice of sanity.
Yeah, and just about last winter, I was with one of my friends. He was on my podcast as well. His name is Dorian, and that day we actually consumed quite a bit of carbs, and we were okay with it because it was a party sort of festival thing that was going on. And I think those experiences do matter as well, and it's not the end of the world if you kind of consume carbs. It's not destruction of your body going on. It's not going to happen in 10 minutes or 10 days or any of that. Anyway, I think that's about it as far as this podcast is concerned. If you have any message that you want to share, please go ahead. If not, let's plug you in.
Yeah, just people can find my book at it's the Alzheimer's Antidote. They can get it on Amazon. And my blog is Tuit Nutrition, TUIT Nutrition.com.
All right. Thank you so much, Amy, for showing up on this podcast. You're a wonderful human being with a great heart. I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you. Same to you.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Please subscribe to our podcast on iTunes and leave us a review if you liked it. You can check out our products at www.ketogeek.com and use our coupon code KGLAUNCH, all caps, for a $5 off of all our food products. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. And if you want to join our community, we have a growing Facebook group as well. Till next time.